Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Yesterday, Ukrainian diplomatic team met with the American counterparts in Saudi Arabia. They've came out after 8 hours of grueling discussion and made some very loud and important statements. I am pretty sure you already heard a thing or two, most notably the supposed 30-day ceasefire. Let's talk about and unpack what exactly happened and how it might influence the war in Ukraine and how we could expect things develop from here. Firstly, let's be very clear on what specifically was agreed to. There has been a joint statement and it's now in writing, so now we can specifically interact with the text that is on paper. And we see that the agreement includes the interim 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreements of the parties and will essentially begin once the Russia agrees to the same ceasefire. The inclusion of exchange of prisoners. There is a high emphasis that the ceasefire should include the exchange of prisoners of war, release of the civilian detainees, and the return of forcibly transferred Ukrainian children. Moreover, the Ukrainian side has further underscored that they would like to see European partners represented at the negotiations table later down the process. Finally, both parties agreed to sign the Ukraine-US minerals deal for the development of Ukraine's natural resources. And overall, this is not bad for Ukraine at all. It's actually quite a win for diplomacy of Ukraine, specifically because right after this announcement was made, it has been confirmed that Ukraine started receiving the US intelligence data and they started receiving the already agreed upon aid coming from the United States. So including the presidential drawdown authority that was done by Joe Biden but still haven't been delivered to Ukraine. And secondly, deliveries of the newly produced weapons from the US defense companies that were contracted in the last 3 years. So let's unpack one by one the statement's point, and we're going to start with the 30-day ceasefire agreement. Is it good or is it bad for Ukraine? It's a 50-50 scenario, right? There are a lot of layers to this 30 days agreement. Most important that we need to understand is not that Ukraine just stops firing and then Russia does whatever they want. No, it's a political agreement with ability to be extended further if it's in place. And most importantly, it allowed Ukraine to switch some of the narratives that were being built up by a lot of the anti-Ukrainian groups inside of US. And I want to underscore here, there's absolutely zero trust from the Ukrainian sides to Russians. And I'm pretty sure there is a very, 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 very low trust towards the Trump administration. From my side, also zero trust to Trump administration. Therefore, when we're looking at this agreement of 30-day ceasefire, it's important to understand what exactly has Ukraine subscribed itself to. And right now, nothing, because now the narratives that's been playing out was that there seems to be some kind of movement by the Trump's administration towards a ceasefire, and yet Ukrainians have been presented as they're difficult to work with. Yet now because of the work of the Ukrainian diplomacy and how everything here has been presented, Ukrainians are basically stating, no, we are ready for peace. Like, we are ready. Just name us the date and so on. Just let the Russians accept. And that is an issue for Russia, because now it's for Russians to agree on that ceasefire. And here, the most important thing to understand is that Putin both needs and doesn't need a ceasefire. And that's why it's hard to predict, because there are arguments stating that for Russia, ceasefire right now could be good, most notably because their forces have been struggling pretty significantly. The losses have been sustained intensely. They could definitely use additional month to build up a lot of their reserves and prepare for new offensive during the summer. Right now, there's not going to be pretty good weather to attack. So there are points on which Russia could definitely benefit, and again display that there is some kind of a peace agreement in mind of Russians. But then on rejection point of that peace agreement, there are pros for Russia as well. Most notably, Russia right now would not want to get any people out from the front lines. Right now, Russian machine and everything that Russia is working because it is working, right? It's running while it's hot. If they suddenly cool that machine and people will start getting back from front lines back towards the civilian lines, and a lot of the people that are fighting for Russia, they really don't want to be there. Really, really don't want to be there, like, because the conditions in the Russian military are not the best. So getting all of these people back into the Russian society, one way or another, would be pretty bad for Russia. Moreover, stating that there should be some kind of peace agreement or some kind of negotiations is not super beneficial for Russia because, in large sense, they achieved nothing. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, they captured some cities, like probably the most notable city that they captured was Mariupol. Yes, they also established the land bridge between Crimea and the occupied previously part of Ukraine. That is also beneficial for Putin. But yet, they are pretty far away from the main part of what Russia wants. Russia did not came to Ukraine just to get some territory. Like, it's a whole big red herring. What Russia wants is a change of government inside of Ukraine. So just agreeing blindly to this peace proposal would be just idiotic for Russia. And there are further points that could be made about acceptance or non-acceptance of the proposal. What we need to see is that Russia is definitely taking it seriously. They have been launching with their propagandists, stating that they shouldn't accept the deal. Then some people were instead coming out with some more critical aspects on it. But from the official Kremlin sources, there was no major announcements on this. I believe the time that we're going to know a bit more is Friday, when I believe, was it Steve Witkoff will come to Moscow and talk with Putin. Mostly what we are looking for and what I expect is that Russia either is going to agree into this deal, and at that moment we're going to understand that Putin realizes that he overstretched his own resources, that his equipment is running out, that his economy is running out, and he just wants to use this moment to take the off-ramp. And there might be some light indicators to what Ukraine could do, but those indicators could be acceptable for Ukraine in some sort of pressure. That is one path. So that is the path at which Putin is realizing that he is going towards the death and deep end of the trench. And then potentially he sees that now is the time to cut corners and potentially continue trying to topple the Ukrainian government by using their subterfuge and diplomatic means. And then the second option that I truly believe is what we're going to see is that because Putin is truly believing in his military and his delusion is bigger than his perception of reality, then what we will see is Russia putting on the table requirements that would not be acceptable for Ukraine. And we could be talking about Ukraine withdrawing some troops from the front lines. We could be talking about Ukrainians demilitarizing certain aspects of the front line. We could be talking about some kind of elections in Ukraine. We could be talking about some kind of Russian language status in Ukraine. So something that is one way or another will be triggering for Ukrainians and or Americans that they just could never accept in any kind of good faith negotiations. So when the message from Kremlin comes, and that message will be a bit convoluted because Putin and his diplomacy are pretty tough, and they will be trying to present it in a way that the ball will be in Ukraine's court. So they will present some kind of a semi-sold agreement that will be difficult for Ukraine. But then, of course, there is also a scenario in which Putin just utterly rejects the agreement or puts forward such a ridiculous requirements, such as like Ukraine needs to give away like their half of their territory to Russia just to start negotiations. That's a non-starter. That's not even a question. Then at that moment we can see no, Putin is utterly and fully is living in his delusion world, and he is not interested in any kind of peace at all. Secondly, the exchange of prisoners, release of the civilian detainees, and return of the children that are forcibly transferred to Russia. Russia is never going to agree to this. Let's not be naive. But I think this is the key part that makes this proposal to have at least some kind of legs to stand off on, because if it wouldn't, then it would be just Putin's playground. He could agree to any kind of peace negotiations, some kind of non-fire proposals. It could be easily turned into the Minsk 3 type of scenario. This is the part that prevents it, because those are the things that we definitely know that Russia don't want to do. Yet if it will be done, obviously it will be a huge win for Ukraine, and Russia is not going to give Ukraine any wins here. Then Ukraine standing for the Europeans participating at the talks is great, because Europeans are actually right now today agreeing on that mission. I believe it's now 15 countries that agreed to participate into the protective mission for Ukraine, be some kind of peacekeepers. And the more I hear about it, the better that perception I think gets. So there is no specific delusion from the European powers that they can substitute Ukrainian military. Instead, they say we will substitute Ukrainian military in the areas where it will be tough for Ukrainian military, like for example on the Polish or the other European states' borders. Provide some air cover from any potential missiles of Russia, and additionally provide technology like responding with the airframes and support with intelligence if any conflict escalates further on. But it will be the Ukrainian military that would be fighting the Russians. So I think it is realistic, and I'm really glad to see that Europeans are approaching this realistically, that they are in the supportive role, not that they are like the ones that are waltzing in on their white horse and stating that we are the force here. They're not. Obviously, Ukraine is the most competent and the strongest army in Europe, and it's good to see that European allies are realizing that right now. Finally, the mineral deal between Ukraine and the United States. It's a framework deal. If you read the document, then it doesn't really say anything about what could be or should be done. So it's not some kind of a colonial deal that was initially presented to Ukrainians. It just allows for further contracts to be made between Ukrainians and Americans to work through the Ukrainian mineral resources. It's not obliging Ukrainians to anything, but it's a great propaganda piece for Trump to show to his electorate that, look at me, I demanded something from Ukraine and I got us paid for that. To sum up, we will see this Friday what will be a response from Kremlin after the talks with Witkoff. I'm not going to expect that Russians are going to accept this deal. That would be weird. I think there are things that Russia just don't want to do for their internal audience as well. I think that it's going to be more of a delayed game, that they're going to try to pretend that they want to have some kind of negotiations, and they will just try to paint Ukraine in bad light and try to essentially throw that ball back into Ukraine's corner, because right now they are in a tough position, especially if we're going to see US. I don't have the trust in it, but like if we will see US pressuring Russia, I would be thoroughly surprised. However, even without that, the fact that US is now delivering weapons again to Ukraine and providing intelligence is a super win for the Ukrainian diplomacy. And all of that 30-day peace agreement, ceasefire, I think it's a lot of bollocks. Thank you so much for watching. Support the Ukrainian Armed Forces, support this channel by subscribing. It really helps promote the video, and it allows you to get notified when we get the new fundraisers to get the help directly to Ukrainian Armed Forces. We have huge plans. Be part of it. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and we'll see you next time.
I see